All right, so our learning target for today is I can identify the parts of the expression and evaluate expressions for one or multiple variables. So we're talking about identifications and evaluation today. So here, this is what we mean when we're talking about an expression. An expression or algebraic expression has number values as well as variable values, and it has different operations that might exist. It has at least one term that's written. So when we're talking about terms, a term, I'm going to go ahead and highlight that in orange. A term is a number, a variable, or a product or quotient of numbers and variables. They're usually going to be separated by an addition or subtraction sign. So for this example up here, I actually have two terms. Two separate terms. This term, this value right here, the 6x, this is considered to be my first term. And then this component right here, this is considered to be my second term. Notice that I identified the second term with the plus sign. The reason I do that is because if I'm looking at it separately, I need to know that it was a positive 2. If it said minus, I would then say, hey, it's a negative 2. The sign, the plus or minus signs, act like positive and negative values when you're looking at them as separate terms. So we've got two terms in this problem. We've got 6x and a positive 2. So I'm even going to put a plus 2 there. So that way I know that that is a positive. Okay. Then we've got what we call a coefficient. God bless you. A coefficient is the number factor of a multiplication term involving a variable. So it's that little number component that's attached or side by side with the variable. So what we see here, this 6x, this is the same thing as saying 6 times x. And this 6, just the 6, I'm only highlighting the 6. That value is my coefficient. Okay, the 6 is going to be my coefficient. So I'm even going to write down here in my example, a 6 was the coefficient for this problem. Then we've got the variable. So a variable is the unknown value. It's usually written as a letter. Most of the time, the letters that we tend to use are X and Y. We might use W's or M's. We don't tend to use T. Anybody want to figure out why they think we don't usually use the letter T? Why do you think?
Because it looks like a plus sign and the letter I or L.
Okay. Okay, so yeah, very good. Thank you for saying that too. We don't use the T because it kind of looks like a plus sign. She also elaborates, she says you probably don't use I or L very often because they kind of tend to look like ones. We don't usually use zeros very often, or O's very often because they look like zeros. So there are certain letters that we tend to avoid as much as possible. I also personally prefer to avoid the letter S because they tend to look like a 5 when some of you write them. So I usually try to avoid the letter S as well. So you'll see certain letters that we do use often. Okay, so the variable in this case happens to be the X. And notice that the 6 and the X, when we multiply them together, that is labeled a term. 6X is a term. The 6 by itself is that coefficient. The X by itself is the variable. Okay, and then we have our second term that we're focusing on, which happens to be called the constant. And the constant in algebraic expressions, those are just numbers. They have no variable attached to it whatsoever. They're usually added or subtracted in the expression. So it's a positive number or a negative number. It is separate from the variable. It's not attached side by side like a coefficient is. Okay? So this, and I'm going to highlight the whole thing. I'm including the plus sign because, again, that plus sign is indicating that it is a positive 2. So that positive 2 is my constant. Now you don't have to write the positive sign. I'm only doing it for right now for this example so that you can see that it is a positive. But in the future, you do not have to write the plus sign, but you do have to write minus signs because those would indicate it's negative. All right, so what we're going to do here, we are going to identify at the bottom. We're going to go ahead and identify how many terms we have. We're going to identify what the coefficients are, what the variables are, and what the constants are. Okay, so in my first problem, I have 8x minus 4. 8x minus 4. Who can tell me what is the first term? The first term in this expression, Gavin? 8x, very good. So 8x is the first term in this expression. And I'm going to use a little semicolon to just kind of separate out so I can have my second term. What is my second term, Justin? Or negative 4. You were starting it off the correct. So minus 4 or negative 4. That minus sign acts like a negative sign now. So we've got negative 4. Okay? So those are our terms. We only had 2 terms. We only had 2 terms. Our first term, so I'm even going to write that at the top of it. This was our first term. It's important to know which one's your first, which one's your second. You might have a third or a fourth term. Okay, this was our second term. All right, so in the problem, what value or values would be considered to be the coefficient? Value or values would be the coefficient. Angel? Just 8. Only the 8 happens to be my coefficient. It is the only number that is attached by the hip to a variable. What about the variable, Isaiah? X. X is the only variable that we happen to have up here. Okay, and then our constant. What's our constant, Marshall? Negative 4. Very good. Okay, so negative 4 or minus 4, that is the only number that is completely separated. It has no attachment to the variable. It's its own value. Okay? All right, let's go ahead and try it again for problem number 2. So for problem number 2, it's a bit of a longer statement, isn't it? We've got 3 minus 2x plus 9 plus 7y minus 13. So we have quite a few terms here. Who can tell me what the first term is? Aisha? Well, you don't have to say negative because the negative is behind it, isn't it? So it's just 3. Just the 3. So our 3 is going to be our first term. What's our second term? Our second term. Ilani? Don't forget the sign in front of it. Negative 2x. So negative 2x, that's my second term. What about my third term? Ashir? 9. Positive 9, right? I don't have to write the plus sign, but because it is got a plus sign in front of it, I know it's positive. That's my third term. Okay, what's the next one going to be? Brian? 7y. Very good. So that's my fourth term. And it's a positive, right? Because it's got a plus sign in front of it. And what's my last term, Dayana? Negative 13. Very good. That minus sign belongs to the 13. That's my fifth term. Okay, now you don't have to write what term number they are. But for those of you who wind up doing the scavenger hunt today, they're going to have statements like I'll show you.
Oh.
They'll say things like, my expression's third term has a coefficient of a 2. And you'll have to find what expression has a coefficient of a 2 for its third term. So you want to make sure you understand first terms and second terms and third and fourth and how they split up, and then what is a coefficient versus what is a constant versus what is a variable. Okay? So speaking of coefficients, let's go ahead and do our coefficient now. So there's more than one coefficient up here. What's one of the coefficients? Justin? -2. And not x, right? We don't attach the x in there because what is x again, guys? A variable. Okay, so we're just talking about the number that's attached to it. So -2 is attached, and that happens to be the coefficient of what term? Which term is it the coefficient of? Marshall? The second term. It's the coefficient to the second term. Okay, there's another coefficient up here. What else happens to be a coefficient? Amaya?
71. No. Oh.
Just +7. Remember, the y is not a coefficient. It's a variable. So we only identify the number. So it's just a +7. And what term is that coefficient belonging to? Isaiah?
Second.
What term did it belong to?
Oh. Fourth.
The fourth term. Very good. Okay, it was the fourth term's coefficient. Okay, so term 2 and term 4, they had coefficients. They had a -2 and a +7. All right, our variables. What are our variables, Guadalupe? X and Y, right? Both our second and fourth term have variables because they had coefficients. If they have a coefficient, they also have a variable. So they had different variables. We have X and we have a Y. All right, now the constants. The constants are just the numbers. Constants are just the numbers. What's one of our constants going to be? It has not been called on yet. Josiah, what's one of the constants that we have up here? A constant. Go ahead. Okay, +9. That happens to be one of them. That's our third term. We had one that's before it, though. What was one of the terms before it that was a constant? Guadalupe? 3. 3, the first term, that was also a constant, and it was a +3. Okay, and then we knew it was a +9 because it said +9. Do we have any more constants up here? Amaya? Go ahead, go with it. -13, very good. That last term, the fifth term, happened to be a negative because it says -13, so it's -13. Okay, so that's the breakdown of terms, coefficients, variables, and constants. Everybody pretty good? All right, so go ahead and flip it on over to the back. We're going to do a quick review over how to evaluate our expressions. And evaluating expressions is just as easy. All you are doing when you evaluate is you are substituting. So if I say that there's a substitute teacher today, what does that mean? That I'm not here. There's a temporary teacher, right? Somebody who's replacing me, right? It's the same thing here. If I say we're substituting a value, it means we're replacing a value with something else. So I'm taking wherever I see this X and I'm replacing it with a 4. So in this problem here, where I see 2, and then I've got parentheses, X +3, and then I know, hey, X is equal to a 4, then what I'm actually going to be doing is I'm replacing my X value with that 4. So wherever I see an X, I substitute a 4 in its place. Okay, now nothing else changed. I still have the 2 on the outside. I still have parentheses. I still have +3 and then close parentheses. Okay, now here's the wonderful thing. Your calculator will do your order of operations for you. If you forgot your order of operations, your calculator will nicely do it for you as long as you type it exactly the way you see it. So the exact way that I see this problem right now, I see a 2. I see parentheses. You guys know where your parentheses are on your calculator, right? Okay, so I'm going to have my parentheses. I see 4 plus 3, and I see a closing of parentheses. And if I hit equals or enter, I get my answer of 14. Now the reason for that, of course I'm going to tell you the reason for it. You first would have to follow the order of operations by adding the 4 and the 3 together, which comes out to 7. And then we're just doing 2 times 7. And 2 times 7 is going to come out to 14. Okay? So it's always a good idea to know your order of operations, but it's also nice to have the calculator to check to see that you've done it correctly. Okay? Let's try problem 2. We have 3, and then inside parentheses we have C minus D. Now, when we're replacing these, what we're going to do is we're replacing our C with the negative 5. So wherever I see the term C, I'm going to replace it with a negative 5. So I've got 3 parentheses minus, and then I've got the term D, and I'm going to replace the D with 8. Just the D. So D becomes 8. And then I've got close parentheses. So we now have the problem 3 parentheses, negative 5 minus 8, close parentheses. So if I were to follow my order of operations, I would have to do the parentheses first. Negative 5 minus the 8 is going to come out to negative 13. And then you've got 3 times that negative 13, and that's going to come out to a negative 39. But again, you can always double check in your calculator. You could type 3 parentheses, negative 5 minus 8, close parentheses, hit enter, and it will come out as negative 39. Okay? Let's try problem 3. So for problem 3, we have a value for x. We're going to replace the x with negative 3. And then we have a value for y. We're going to replace the y with a positive 2. And nothing else is going to change. So I've got negative 5 parentheses, and then I have a 4, and then it's a negative 3. So am I going to write 4 minus 3? Is that what it wants me to do? No. What operation is it when they're side by side again, Brian? Multiplication. So I'm going to write a little multiplication dot. Okay? If you guys have forgotten what different symbols you can use for multiplication, on the back we've got the invisible math board. One of those little posters up there where it says invisible math, it has different ways that you can write multiplication. You can write them side by side like 4x is. You can write them 4 and then the little dot symbol in between. We're going to not use our little multiplication x anymore. Why do you think we're not going to use the multiplication x anymore? Isaiah? It may look like a variable. Very good. It might start looking like a variable and you don't want to get confused anymore. So you want to forget using the multiplication x. You want to make sure you use the little dot from now on. So we're replacing our x value with a negative 3. So we're doing 4 times negative 3. And then we still have that minus 2, close parentheses, plus, and then we have 3 times the y. What am I replacing the y with?
2.
A 2. So it's 3, and then the multiplication dot, and 2. Okay, so again, you can just type this into your calculator exactly as you see it. I want you guys to take a second to do that right now. Type it exactly as you see it and hit enter. As you're doing that, I'm going to go over what steps we would have to do. So in this problem, we would have to do 4 times the negative 3 first, which would come out to a negative 12. That would give us -5 parentheses -12 minus 2 plus, and then we could also do this 3 times 2, which comes out to a 6. Then we would have to go about doing -12 minus the 2 inside of the parentheses. We have to do our subtraction in the parentheses first. That would come out to -14. So then we have -5 times -14 plus the 6. Then we would just go ahead and multiply -5 times -14, and that's going to come out to a positive 70. And then we're going to add the 6, and we should get what? 76. Did you guys get 76 in your calculator?
Yeah.
Very good. Okay. So we're actually going to skip doing the last one because I want us to be able to go to lunch. I'll go ahead and post what the answer would be, though, for you guys when if you want to watch the video later. Go ahead and row 1, you can line up.